Stanford, yeah, thanks. Good morning, everybody. We've got 3 Stanford people here today to tell you about the self-deposit application that we put into production in August. It's called H2, and I'll explain that in a moment. So let's begin. So I am Hannah Frost, Assistant Director for Digital Library Services at Stanford, and I worked as the project manager and sort of a co-analyst on the project. Mike Giarlo, you want to introduce yourself, Mike?
Sure. I'm Mike Giarlo. I'm a software engineer and technology strategist at Stanford Libraries, and I was a co-tech lead of the H2 project.
And I'd like to welcome our colleague, Amy Hodge. Amy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Amy Hodge. I am the science data librarian at Stanford Libraries, and I was the product owner for this development project.
And Amy and I have worked together for a long time on SDR services for campus users. We're sort of connected at the hip in many ways. So it's a pleasure to have Amy here who will be doing the majority of the presentation today. But I'm going to give some background and context, and then Amy will talk about the project planning and management. Mike will talk about the technology. We'll talk about the change management process, overview of the features, and then a brief demo. So next slide. Oh, that's not my, will you go to the next slide? That's the slide I wanted to show. I forgot to delete my old format, sorry. So back in 2013, we released Hydrus, which is our internal name for the application, a Hydra-based application to production. And it was our self-deposit app. And we used it for a steady 5 years heading into the Hydra in a Box project. But when that wrapped up, we, Stanford, after long analysis and hard discussions, we came to the conclusion that we did not want to migrate to Fedora 4. So we spent some time thinking about what's next. That took time. And then 2020 hit and we all went home. We said, this is the perfect time to kick off a big internal development project. So we kicked off H2, which we couldn't come up with an interesting new name for the next application. So the H stands for Hydrus and 2 is, the next application. It's as simple as that. So we considered our use cases, our feature requests, and the lessons learned over the past, 8 or so years. We did do some investigation into options for what to replace it with. We looked at Invenio, which was sort of interesting, but not a good fit for us. We looked at Dataverse because of the demand for depositing of data sets, but also concluded it was not a good fit. And we looked at Hyrax, of course. In my next slide, I will show why we concluded that Hyrax, while it had many features that we need and would be a solid starting point for what we need, it was just not going to work in our architecture. So we decided to go greenfield. Next slide, please. So many of you may have seen this before. It's sort of it's a picture of our architectural at a very high level that we've been using for a long time. In the upper left corner is where Fedora 3 sits. Amy, will you click? Yeah, there's the Fedora 3 part that we are actively planning to migrate from in 2022. And Hydrus, as you can see, next, will you click again? That's Hydrus. That's the part of SDR that we, excuse me, we're setting out to replace. Just one of 8 ways that content gets into the SDR. The reason that Hyrax wouldn't be a good fit for us is because we have such a complex infrastructure and many components that deal with, excuse me, many other components that deal with the access, discovery, and delivery components of the repository. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy, who will talk about the project from here.
Great, thank you, Hannah. So when we set off on this project, we set a list of goals for ourselves of what we wanted to achieve in this project. These included replacing the existing code base which was, basically the same code base we started with in 2013. So pretty out of date, and had all these connections to Fedora and the rest of our infrastructure that we needed to sort of disentangle, for lack of a better description for that. We wanted to provide some high value, compelling new features for campus stakeholders, many that they've been requesting for a very long time. We wanted to make the site more accessible, that is, include accessibility features into the UI. We wanted to position ourselves to better support the campus's fairly new open access policy and other OA and FAIR opportunities that we saw coming down the pipe. We wanted to integrate H2 better with other parts of our digital library and campus research, computing, and information types of services run by us and other groups on campus. We wanted to dovetail with other SDR evolution efforts that are going on. We have this big system. This isn't the only part that's getting an overhaul. We wanted to make sure that what we were building was sort of dovetailing with those efforts. And we wanted to make something that was sustainable, maintainable, and upgradable. So the other app had sat for a long time without much attention, and we didn't want that to happen again. So we needed to build something that we felt we could easily pay more attention to, I guess, and keep updated. So in a nutshell, we wanted to create a next generation, high value, self-service repository application and integrated data services. I'm not going to talk too much about this slide, mostly just to say that we had a very large and diverse set of stakeholders involved with this for this project that included people from the library and people from all across campus at every type of sort of position and level. One thing I do want to point out is this SDR steering group down here, which was newly formed, and I'll talk about them a little bit more in a minute. And this is composed of mostly internal library staff, but also some people from university archives and also from our Dean of Research's office who have some particular interest in the direction of SDR as a whole. So this group is set up to sort of guide future directions of SDR service. So this is our sort of project timeline in general. So starting way back in 2013, way back here, for years, we've been collecting this sort of treasure trove of user feedback and requests. So we had a pretty good idea what we weren't doing very well and which things, well, and what we were doing some things pretty well, and what sort of things people really wanted. And we took advantage of that sort of treasure trove of information when we were looking at how to design this project. In January 2020, we did an SDR service blueprinting exercise with a small group of faculty and researchers and some others on campus who were also involved in repository services. It was a 3 or 4 hour event where we all got in a room together, which is a weird thing to say now. We all got in one small room together for hours. And looked at sort of like what the SDR could be and what maybe it needed to be for researchers on campus. In May of 2020, analysis and planning for the project began in earnest with the project team to work through the priorities and the details of feature implementation. And this is around the time that our SDR steering group was formed, and they meet monthly and met monthly during this whole process. And we were able to sort of reflect on progress and what was going on with them and get feedback from them about what we were doing and the direction we were going. During August of 2020, our UX designer did user interviews and wireframes testing with sort of what we had in our design bucket at the time, and we fed that back into the specs for the project and the design documentation. And then in October 2020, the team began the development work. And so we did 2 work cycles back to back that ran into February. At that time, the team took a break from this project to work on a different project. I can't even remember what that was at the time, but they went to work on something else. And during that time, Hannah and I ran beta testing with actual users on the stage and the development environment for what we had, and we sort of fed that information back into the process as well about what was and wasn't working. And And the other thing that Hannah and I did during this time was a lot of the content migration planning. We've been doing some testing before, but we had a lot of work with the actual content that we did over this period of time as well. Then in May, we kicked off the third and fourth of our work cycles to sort of finish up this project, which we hope actually never to be completely finished. I kind of hope, but to get it to production. At the beginning of August, which was in the fourth work cycle, we did a limited release to a subset of our power users, and we were able to immediately incorporate feedback from them and fix issues that we had during the weekly releases. So before we did the full production release. So at the end of August, we'd only migrated a tiny bit of the content for our power users. We migrated all the rest of the content over and did the full production release, which was a pretty big, it went pretty smoothly, I think. There were not too many hiccups. Okay, now I'm gonna hand this over to Mike to talk a little bit about the technology.
Okay, and this may be somewhat boring, and if it is, it's because we wanted it to be. Like, we were out to build an application that was as vanilla Rails web application as we could, and kind of defer interacting with the repository until fairly late in the deposit flow. So essentially, the technology overview is it's an end user application. It handles deposit and updates, and we don't interact with the repository until the very, very end. Files have been uploaded, metadata has been put in, the user looks at it, a bunch of validations run, and then there's a button to click. And when you click it, it ships everything off to the repository without any real user fanfare. And the way that we do that is we push deposits to a very small API that we built and designed ourselves. It's called the SDR API because it's an API to SDR. And the form of the object, if you will, that crosses the wire to the API is Cosina JSON. And some of you who've been in the community for a number of years will remember back around, 2017, 2018, we had made a number of presentations on this Cosina data model. So we've made good on that, and we're actively using it now to publish our objects and collections. And just to make it explicit, nothing in our stack, I believe it's true that we don't have a single gem, not even a single line of code that was produced by this lovely community that we are partners of. Okay, the other interaction with SDR with the repository is the application does consume messages. Those come over via a technology called RabbitMQ. But at any rate, so we shunt this Cosina JSON over the wire to this API, and then the application is like, okay, I've started a deposit. And then it just listens for messages to get confirmation that one, it completed, and two, that a repository identifier, which we call Druids, has been minted, at which point we can construct a link to our access system, the Perl system, and then display it in the application for users to click on. Technologies used, a lot of fairly vanilla Rails and Ruby ecosystem gems. So we use Rails 6.1 with Postgres database backend. So the metadata and information about the user, that's all stored in a backend, in a relational database. It's not stored in a repository system. For client interactive behavior, we use the Stimulus JavaScript framework, and that's a very lightweight JavaScript framework that was designed largely by the team that works on Rails, so designed to go hand in hand with how we do things in the Rails world. And we are using a new technique for JavaScript bundling called JS Bundling Rails. And essentially, the long story short version on this is it doesn't require any transpilation of the JavaScript or any Webpack compilation. You put the JavaScript assets on the file system and they're served as is, which makes for a much quicker deployment process. We do use a new approach to doing live updates. It's called HTML over the wire or Hotwire. This too was like a skunkworks project done by David Heinemeier Hansen, DHH, the person who invented Rails. And this is essentially a way to ship small chunks of updated HTML to end users without requiring a page refresh. We do UI components via the Vue component library. We use a number of other community standard gems, such as action policy for making authorization decisions, and the Rails built-in active storage library for handling file uploads. And we did an experiment for probably the better part of a year of using Sorbet, which is a strong typing system in Ruby. And we thought in the beginning that we would get a lot of value out of it, and we did get some value out of it, but at the end we determined that the cost outweighed the benefits, and it just for a front end app, and given kind of an impedance mismatch between Sorbet and Ruby 3 type checking that's coming, we decided to jettison it. But we learned from the experience. And of course, as everything we do, or most of the things we do, it's open source and it's available on GitHub. Back to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. You did so much better a job at that than I ever could have dreamed that I could have done. So a couple more things before we get to the demo. So just a few notes about the content migration. So we needed to migrate the content from the old application system to the new application system. So that's from the Hydrus bubble that Hannah showed to the H2 replacement bubble in that system, in our system. So we spent some time taking stock of everything that was in Hydrus, what files were there, what metadata was there, and triaging and resolving metadata mapping issues, because there were a variety of them, as there always are. Metadata is always going to be a problem, it seems like. And then we actually enlisted our stakeholders to help us quite a bit with cleaning up content. So figuring out who owned what, which was not always clear. And there was some orphan content that we needed to figure out, who should be owning it. Getting people to discard things that could be discarded, stuff that had been started but had never had any information added to it, things like that. Completing things that were unfinished but that people did want to finish, and then looking for things that were in the Hydrus system, have been deposited and were complete, that no one was ever going to touch in the self-deposit system again. Then those are some things that we didn't need to migrate to the new system. So they're all still in the repository. They're just not sitting in the application, in the application system, as it were. The other bit was about communication support strategy, and we spent quite a lot of time on this as well. So if you remember the slide with all the stakeholder groups, we had a large and diverse stakeholder group. And so we sort of identified what the distinct audiences were there, and what sort of messages they needed to get and when. And we prepared some materials particularly targeted towards our library colleagues who also work with researchers on the repository, to document for them about what has changed in the application, what new features are there, so that they would be better prepared to work with these people. And then we did a lot of just-in-time communications with emails and a variety of other things, like before, like this is coming, and then this is now, and then this has just come, and you should do this, and now that it's here, it's time for this. We did this through our website, blog posts. We sent a bunch of emails internally with school staff. We did a lot on Slack, and then there were YouTube channel videos introducing the new application and how to do specific tasks, things like that. We did our best to be as available as we could to answer questions and provide support to people as quickly as we could. And then we spent a lot more time than I thought we would need to, but a lot of time documenting all of this process for transparency and auditing purposes. So in the end, this application does a lot of, in general, the general description of it is, again, pretty vanilla. It does, I think, all kinds of things that you would think it would do. It supports deposit into the repository by users with university credentials. There are a number of different roles. The content there is organized into collections, and each collection contains items or works. These collections and items, both the metadata and the files in them, can be versioned. There is an optional review workflow that collection managers can turn on that then requires a manager or a reviewer to approve something before it can be deposited or published to a Perl page. Content is published to persistent URL pages. And one thing I am going to show you in a minute is that we did some extensive, this is actually a fair amount of work, extensive reconfiguring of the work type and subtype options that we have. So I'll show you that in the demo, which I'm going to move to now. So let me switch over to here. So this is the homepage for the new application. And you click on this big button and then authenticates you into the system. And when you log in, if you have works in progress, you get this nice pop-up menu that's pop-up window that says, would you like to keep working on your test deposit for the Samvera partners meeting? And I can say yes. I'm not going to say yes right this second. I will go there in a minute, but I'm going to say no so I can show you something else. But it sort of helps. This is one problem we had with users not understanding how to get back to works in progress. So we're trying to help them out with that. So this is a dashboard. You can see works that you have in progress show up at the top of this page, followed by, if you are a collection manager or reviewer for a collection that has the review workflow on, things that are awaiting your approval show up here. And then all your collections are below that. So I'm going to click, this is how you would normally start deposit to this collection. And I want to show you our sort of revamped work type, subtype selections that we have. So previously we had this one flat list of types, item types that you could choose from, and it ranged, it was really a sort of, it was organically created. Let's say we started out with a list, and then over time somebody would say, well, there's nothing on here that really fits what I have. Could you add a type like this? And we would add one or a couple here and there. And so there were some things that were really specific and some things that were really general, and there still were instances where we didn't really have quite the right thing for people. So we tried to do this in a kind of broad way to get something to cover all the categories. So what we have are 9 main work types, and then we have subtypes. So I don't know if you can see these very well. That type is probably very small. So these are text, data, software code, image, sound, video, music, mixed materials, and other. So for the top 6 on here, if you click on one of these, you're presented with a short list of things that we think are the most likely kinds of things you're depositing. If, for example, you're depositing text, and they change. So if you have data, then that short list is a different short list of things. And you can choose one of these if you like. If you don't see what you want here, there are more options. And this is the full list of item subtype options that we have. And so you can look through this for any of these items. So if I'm on data or software, they're all there. And you can pick one. You can pick, actually you don't have to, for the top 6, you don't have to choose any. It's optional, but you can choose as many as you'd like. So if you have, it's mostly this, but there's also this one other little thing in there, you can choose that as well. For music, you actually have to choose one of the items from the short list, and then you can choose anything else if you'd like. For mixed materials, since it's supposed to be a mixture of materials, you have to choose at least 2 things from the list. We have a lot of people choosing this for not the right reason, but in the past we actually had this option. And so you have to choose 2 things. And if you choose other, which we hope people do infrequently, you're required to fill in some textual description of the work to tell us what it is. So we have, because others not very descriptive. So I'm actually not going to continue into this. I'm going to go into the item that I have in progress. But if you click that continue, then you would be taken to this form, which would be empty at the time. And this has, I think, fairly standard kind of fields. There's a drag and drop option or a choose file thing here to upload your files. There's a title and contact emails. I'm going to show you a couple of things we've added. So one new thing is we let people enter ORCID IDs now. And if you enter an ORCID, it's using the ORCID API to contact ORCID and retrieve author name information into the application. So that's really awesome. And then we're saving both the ID and the name, which is editable here if you'd like. Dates and abstracts and keywords and things. One of my favorite things I'll have to show you is our is this real-time building, like citation, auto-generated citation. So it's done this. So I just added Anthony Fauci, and he's shown right here. It's hard to see this because you can't get it on the screen while you're doing things, but I'll just show you that if I go in here and add in like me, because of course I'm going to be on and work with Anthony Fauci, that'd be awesome. Then it has automatically updated this citation to include me there. If you want to edit that, you can click it off and it will let you edit. So, but that's one of my favorite bits. Then we also are now able to generate DOIs when people deposit content. So right now this collection is set so that the depositor can choose, but the manager can decide to make this just always assign a DOI or never assign a DOI if you want to do that. And then this is the point that Mike was talking about. This is now where we are contacting the repository. I'm going to tell it to deposit. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Hold on. Don't do that yet. I'm going to turn that off. I don't want to make DOIs I don't need. I'm going to click this. And if I go back here to my item, there's a message here. So that's telling me as a depositor, I'm getting real-time status update here that my deposit is in progress. And this is also what Mike was talking about. It's about consuming messages from SDR. When this is done, which doesn't normally take very long, and I put a very tiny file on here, it updates just like that. And it says deposited. The last thing I wanted to show you really quickly was we sometimes have users who need a DOI or a persistent URL now to send with a publisher, like right away to send in with galley proofs or submission to publisher, but they're not going to be able to get the data deposit finished immediately, and they want where it's going to be when it's done, but it's not going to be there yet. And so we have this button to reserve a Pearl and this DOI. So you put in a title that can be edited later. And then the DOI option that's shown here is however it is set for the collection. So if the collection's always on, it just says this is going to get a DOI. In this case, I can choose and I can toggle that off, but I would put in a temporary title here and submit it. And then I would get that Pearl and that DOI right away. And then I can finish the deposit later. So that's all I plan to show you now for the demo. I don't know if all of these questions all things in the chat are all technology. I see. It looks like Mike is answering them with. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we have any unanswered questions in the chat just yet.
Okay.